British people face energy bills of over £5,000. At the same time, energy companies are paying out billions of pounds in dividends. This week, friend of the show, Owen Jones, explained on Channel 5 why this simply cannot go on.
Owen. A bigger windfall tax. We know there's a 25% windfall tax already scheduled. That is going to raise roughly £5 billion.
Doesn't apply to all the massive profits they've made before. It's only applies from the last few weeks. So all the vast profits, like BP making £6.9 billion. Do you know how much the shareholders of these energy companies have got in dividends since 2010? £200 billion. £200 billion, which could have been used to lower people's bills. £200 billion, by the way, which could have been used to invest in clean energy to make us energy independent so we wouldn't be exposed to these massive global headwinds. The idea the government are on another planet, not another planet, another universe. If they think these energy companies are going to invest these massive profits into, for example, energy independence, 60% of their new profits are going to dividends for their shareholders. It's a complete, I have to say, it's a challenge to people watching this. Have you lost your minds? Look, no, listen to this. Listen. This is such an important point. £4,400 energy bills. That isn't extortionate. That isn't simply a rip-off. That is a humanitarian catastrophe. People can't afford to pay that. It's literally impossible. Millions of people will not be able to afford to live in one of the richest countries on the face of the earth. Now, the fact that people are angry about this, fine. They're angry about it. They're yelling at their TVs. They're lying awake at night worrying about it. What on earth does it take in this country for people to take to the streets and actually do something? We can't just sit here while millions of people are driven literally so far below the poverty line that they can no longer afford to even exist. It's ludicrous. What we need to do, obviously, is not just keep doing windfall taxes, by the way, because all that's doing is dealing with the symptoms of privatising an industry, which is a natural monopoly, which is obviously one of our most basic needs. So we should bring them under public ownership. Take France at the moment. France have got a nationalised energy system, right? Their energy prices, their bills aren't going up by 400 quid. They're going up by only 4%. Because the government are forcing them because they can to keep people's energy bills down. Britain, but let them run for the people of this country instead of shareholders who just want to rip us all off.
Okay. Aaron, I want your response to Owen Jones' intervention there. It's pretty well put, I thought.
It was beautifully put, Michael. And he's right. I mean, I'm a bit more optimistic. He's saying, what will it take for people to go to the street? I mean, people know if they go to the streets, that's not going to stop anything. What's that going to stop? So I'm a bit more sympathetic to people sort of not necessarily saying, well, we have to do something right now. I think the Don't Pay campaign, I think, is going to capture a really important part of the zeitgeist. You're looking at about, from a poll that came out from Savanta, around 25% of the public is saying that they aren't going to be able to pay their bills or won't pay those bills, 25%. And I think that would be more worrying for the government and for the energy companies than people protesting. If 25% of people said we're not going to pay our bills, that is existential for their bottom line and for their business model. And in terms of the more broad problems, and it goes back to something you were saying about Liz Truss, Michael, when you were saying that, most people don't have a problem with profits. There were loads of profits being made between 1997 and 2007 in this very strange economic model we had, which can never be repeated, by the way, which had a bunch of downsides, and we could have done things so much better. But you did have this period of relatively high profits, relatively decent-ish, better than now, wage growth. Certainly access to credit was good, so people could buy houses and so on. You did have this moment where people's living standards were getting better and profits were high. What we have now is very high profits and people getting poorer at a catastrophically quick pace. Okay, so let me give you an example. BT have recorded post-tax profits of 1.2 billion. I think they paid out 700 million in dividends. Their CEO is on £3.5 million when you have the entire salary package. Mr. Janssen, Philip Janssen, I believe his name is. So he's had a massive inflation-busting pay rise. The shareholders get their 700 million, massive profits, and yet you've got BT call centre workers, Michael, in the Northeast, who are on £20,000 a year, who have to use a food bank. They've got the food bank at work. I think it's called like a workplace pantry or something. It's like something you get at Waitrose. So people look at that and they say, well, the shareholders are getting 700 million. the senior staff, like the CEO, the CFO, the chief financial officer, they're getting millions of pounds. The company's doing really well. The people who literally are the bread and butter of the company, that pick up the phones, that go around fixing people's internet, there is no business without those people. Those people are using food banks. That does incense people. And if your response to that is, well, we shouldn't be ashamed of people making profits, you should absolutely be ashamed of a business which makes profits, pays millions to its CEO, and yet has its staff on the factory floor having to use food banks. Yes, you should be absolutely ashamed of that. And so I think you've got people like Owen Jones explaining this with utter clarity in the media. Of course, we do it too here at Novara Media. But my God, it's common sense, Michael. And the situation is so bad, and yet pretty much the entire political class, and I have to say much of the media, look outlandish. Not all of the media. You know, you get Martin Lewis going on the BBC or ITV quite regularly now, talking common sense. But a lot of the pundits and so on, like Owen says, people are physically not going to be able to pay these bills. So what are we going to do about it as a society? Lock them all up? Do they get their credit rating destroyed? Do they, fall behind on their bills? They stop eating? They stop feeding their kids? What's the proposal here? I mean, we clearly are going to have some cap on prices, which is not the energy cap, which we're getting from the government, because it's not a cap. It's a, multiples increase on our energy prices over the course of 1 year. We're clearly going to have to do something quite significant. What's it going to look like? And that is a question that's really not coming from much the media or the sort of the Westminster class. Owen is a strange person when you see him saying this on the television. There's very few people that are saying it. Grace, Martin Lewis, Ash Sarkar, Owen Jones. I mean, it's common sense that they are right. So why isn't everybody talking like this on the TV and in the newspapers?
We've got more coming up on this story and on the idea of nationalising the energy companies. First of all, if you're enjoying the show, do like the video. It helps us on the algorithm. Now, Aaron, I want to put a challenge to you. There's been a lot of debate online about whether nationalising energy companies would make much of a difference to energy prices. And this chart from the FT shows it's not a completely ridiculous thing to say. It shows the various costs that make up an energy bill. The dark blue is the wholesale cost of gas. The light blue is the cost of connecting to the national grid. Then you've got the operating costs, the green levy, and finally, in the light pink, VAT and the profits made by the energy retailers. Now, Aaron, the argument made by people who oppose nationalisation, who say it's not going to be the answer to the cost of living crisis, is they say, look, the profits is only a slim section of this increase in prices, 1.9% of their total revenue of the cost of these bills. In that context, what is the point in nationalising the energy companies? How would you respond to them?
Well, we clearly need to move away from the price signal in terms of how this is going to be determined. Clearly, I mean, there's a decent argument which says we want people to move away from energy inefficiency. We want people to adopt green technologies. So some change in the price signal, particularly for more affluent consumers who can afford to do that, that might not be a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad argument. But I think even for those people who are very well off, when you include what's going to happen with interest rate changes, the Bank of England saying that we're going to see interest rates peak at 3%. Bullshit. They're saying 12 months from now, inflation is still going to be 9.5%. Interest rates are 1.7% now, 1.75%. Interest rates aren't going to be 3%. They're going to be 5%, 7%. I mean, maybe not. They might change their rules, but right now they increase interest rates as long as inflation is significantly above 2%. And they're saying it's going to be 9.5% next year. So between energy costs, between interest rates, between a recession, which we're told is going to last for 5 quarters, a lot of people are going to be hit. So I don't buy this argument of let's just help, the bottom 20%, because actually I think 3/4 of society has a big problem here. On the James O'Brien show on LBC, I don't talk about that gentleman positively very often, but a caller called him, had a fish and chip shop. He said, look, my energy bills are going to go from something like £8,000 to £70,000. I think when you hear stories like that, you have to understand, Michael, energy is the bedrock of a modern economy. It is the bedrock, which of course have been fossil fuels for a long time. We need to decarbonize. But regardless, a modern industrial economy relies on energy. And I think when you have costs that prohibitively high, you're going to see, vast numbers of businesses going bankrupt. Forget the humanitarian crisis of people not being able to heat their own homes. Vast numbers of businesses going bankrupt. You're going to look at things like automotive manufacture, for instance, where the overhead from energy is so high. If you're Nissan, you probably think, well, look, let's just decrease production for 6 months. Let's see what's going to happen in the UK. You might ramp up production in France because energy is cheaper. Or you might be in a country where energy is really, really cheap. I don't know, where they're their production plants are. If you have a production plant in Brazil, it's got big oil production over there. They might have cheaper energy prices. That's going to be a factor too. So I think not just the consumption side, on the humanitarian side, also on the production side. Obviously, if all these businesses disappear, all those people become unemployed, that's a huge hit, not just to the economy, but again to tax receipts. And that makes the recession even deeper because businesses lay people off, those people don't pay taxes, they need unemployment benefit, they need housing benefit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you skewer all of that, Michael, by making a really decisive intervention in fixing prices for energy. And from what I understand, and I'm yet to see a better argument for it, or against it rather, from what I understand, the most elegant solution to that is nationalisation. Now, you have Gordon Brown saying, just a few days ago, I think in the Guardian, or maybe it was elsewhere, but reports in the Guardian, that we're going to have temporary nationalisation. I disagree with that. Why should it be temporary? Why should we only socialize these industries when there are problems? Why don't we, if they're profitable, let's socialize them all the time? If they're integral to a modern economy, which clearly they are, as I've just explained, then they should be held in public ownership for the public good. The question is, I think nationalization or part nationalization or big stakes of equity in energy companies and wholesale and a bunch of different layers of the sort of supply chain, I think that's coming. I do think that's coming actually in a lot of Western countries. Should it be temporary or should it be permanent? I think on the left, we should be saying it should be permanent. And also, look, that's going to help us accelerate decarbonisation, right? Because we need to be planning how much energy we generate and from what sources in a far more considered way than we presently do.